when we're doing, I mean, for those of you who hate spreadsheets, this is going to be a real, brain fryer. But when we're doing our calculations, something that can play into the calculation is just running that insurance calculus. So, just to reiterate, if you get an insurance claim where your deductible is $2,500, the claim's $5,000, but the remaining $2,500 actually gets spread out over a 5-year period, and you have to pay an extra $5,000 in premiums, say, over the next 5 years. You're paying more right now, but you're actually saving your money in the long term by making a choice about, when you're going to do that repair. So if you have a claim, don't just ask your insurance broker what the process is to get the claim, but use Derek as a resource, asking him, hey, if I make this claim, how's it going to affect my premium? And then add that amount up and compare it against the amount that you're going to get for that claim, because that's an important calculation to make. It's all about ROI, and we're investors, so that's what we're here to talk about. All right, let's transition. So now we've talked about insurance implications. Now we're going to talk about the the phrase
maintenance.
An ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. So, Pierre, when I interviewed you to get ready for and to just let people know that you're going to be a speaker, you told the story about how something that would have cost you $5 in 5 minutes ended up costing you $15,000. So I'll let you tell that story in a minute, but let me introduce you first. So I love your virtual background. You got your company logo large and proud behind you. Overview right. Property inspection. Pierre is an unbelievable property inspector. He inspects all of the properties for us at Mogul. When we buy our properties, he inspects them. And the reason I love Pierre is the same reason that I sometimes hate Pierre. And it's that he is so incredibly thorough and detail-oriented that if there is something wrong with a property, he will find it. Now, from a realtor's perspective, sometimes I'm like, stop freaking out the buyer. But you know what? We want you as the buyer to be well protected, well covered, and well informed. So, Pierre, your level of thoroughness and diligence never ceases to amaze me. And
appreciate the feedback.
Oh, hey, buddy, you know your stuff, and we love you for it. So, Pierre is going to talk about property maintenance. Again, just in time for that spring cleaning, just in time for that spring maintenance. I asked Pierre the question, what are the things that you should look for in a house that if you do them now, cost you a couple of bucks, and if you ignore them, cost you a fortune later on? So Pierre, take it away, my friend. I'm going to go on mute here while you do your thing.
Perfect. So I'm Pierre, the owner of Overview Property Inspection, and we do residential and commercial inspections. And just a little bit of background, my wife and I, we are active investors. We've been investing in Edmonton since 2009 in single family homes and suited properties. So a little bit of background on experience. I'm a carpenter by trade. I own a construction company. We've flipped houses. We've built secondary suites, both personally and for clients. Essentially, I've been in the construction industry for as long as I can remember. Truth be told, there's a lot of people saying you can buy a maintenance-free home. Well, that's a unicorn. There's no such thing. And so there's a saying I like to say, it's called heifer dust. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the expression, essentially it means bullshit. It's a telltale that I got from my father-in-law that they pass around on the countryside. So nonetheless, what I want to talk to you guys about is maintenance. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do a hybrid approach. We're going to talk about how to inspect or review your building, also what you should be looking out for, and then we're going to focus predominantly on the exterior with a little bit of interior highlights. Okay, so as James was mentioning, we bought a property in 2009. It was a little half duplex in North Edmonton, Baturn. And one spring morning, my wife was doing a move out inspection with a resident, and she called me to say that we had water damage in the house. So fortunate for me, my in-laws were in town visiting, and so armed with my inspection camera, my thermal image camera, my equipment, I went to the property and started looking on the inside, and sure as guns, there is some water damage on the inside. So I go to the exterior, have a look to see what is going on, and lo and behold, there's moisture coming in. Took about 2 seconds to identify the cause, and so this led to the removal of the baseboard. I might add that it's underneath an 8-foot window at the front of the property. Okay, so we removed the baseboard. We're now removing the drywall, and then we're removing the vapor barrier and the insulation to find that the entire front of the property is rotted. Yeah, so this came to us reframing the entire front of the property, adding new windows. Evidently, you're going to insulate, you're going to do your drywall, refinish the inside. And then from there, we wanted to spruce up the front of the property. So we added some cultured stone and vinyl siding. And then from there, because the property was substantially renovated, we didn't want to just leave an old kitchen. So that led into installing a new kitchen from IKEA. We did a two-tone. And it didn't take very long for us to accumulate $15,000 in material cost. Now, the culprit, it was a leaky gutter end cap. So whenever you've got your eave trough, so be a cap at the end, there's a bead of caulking on the inside. Well, that had failed. And so had we have been more attentive to that, we would have been able to spend $7 and 15 minutes worth of work would have prevented this catastrophe. The upside to it, we've got a rockstar tenant in there paying down the debt for us. So thanks to Ali for that help with that big renovation. So one thing to be mindful, if you've got tenant or if you've got people visiting from out of town, it's a good time to tackle major renovation, just so you guys are aware. Okay. So going back about maintaining a house, you'll see listing sheets often say maintenance-free home. Well, there's no such thing. Gutters need cleaning, windows need cleaning, grass needs cutting. This is all maintenance. And truth be told, I wish I could press Alt-Control-Delete on that saying and maybe apply that to the first half of 2020, because as everything is going, I wish that it would be gone already. Now, the way I do my walkthroughs, a couple things. I do mine quarterly, and some of you guys will be thinking, why would you go ahead and do a maintenance walkthrough quarterly? Well, the more active you are with your maintenance, the less that things will deteriorate, which we are unaware of. So we say do quarterly, and I'll tie back in why to quarterly a little bit later, okay? Hands down, everyone knows the number one enemy to your house is moisture. You guys can't see the cup because of the backdrop, but it's water, okay? Materials that we're using today, MDF, casing, baseboards, doors, laminate flooring, even melamine cabinets. With a little bit of moisture, this stuff doesn't last. And so you got to make sure that you're proactively managing the surface runoff. Now, when I say surface runoff, I don't just mean the grading. That's a part of this component, but you've got to look at a house as a whole. Okay, so you're looking at the roof, you're looking at the water management system. So that's the gutters, the downspout, sorry, and the flashing details that help assist to manage that as a system. Okay, the truth is, to be blunt, not everyone has the skills, the time, the ability to do a walkthrough assessment. Okay, especially a roof if you've got a two-story home. So these are things that should be looked at annually, especially the roof. Okay, but what I do when I'm doing my inspections, I have adapted the use of my device for my inspections. I have a note, and so I also use my inspection software to input any deficiencies that I'm observing, okay? Now, what I've done is most of you guys won't have a checklist, so I went ahead and created a checklist for you guys. So email me after the presentation, and I'll be able to forward you a copy of that, okay? Now, with that in mind, when you are beginning your assessment, the first thing you want to do is, at least what I do, is I always stand at a property from a distance. I'll stand back 50 feet, and then I'll look at everything as a whole. I want to look at the roof. I'm looking for, is there any missing shingles? Is there any wind-related damage that's occurred from the shingles? Next thing I'll be looking at will be the gutters. Do I have a proper slope in the direction of where the downspout is placed? And then continuing down, I'll look to see where the downspout is placed. You want to make sure that that's effective. If you're discharging next to the foundation, it's not an ideal condition. Okay, we'll go into that a little bit after. But when you are looking at that system, look for any signs of stains. Joints in particular, moisture and dirt will leave a telltale trace of those particular leaks. Of course, obviously, when you are looking at a distance, be mindful of, if you've got vinyl siding, make sure that you look right underneath the soffits, because what happens is contractors are installing vinyl siding, and at the soffits, they're not putting an end trim that is designed to keep the siding tightly installed to the wall. So it's a kind of a shortcut that they're doing. And then a couple of years down the road, that siding tends to fall. If you drive around new subdivisions, guaranteed, if you look at 10 houses, at least one of those houses will be missing siding from the prevailing winds. Okay, so I focus on looking at the siding. Look at for any signs of damage that you can see, any cracks from hail. And also you're going to want to pay particular attention to openings around doors and windows. Okay, if you've got a light colored stucco, pay particular attention at the base, because if you've got any discoloration on either side of the window, this is a good telltale indicator that potentially you're getting water intrusion coming in, corroding any of the fasteners that's in the framing or at least in behind the stucco, and then leaching back out, leaving that trail. Okay, so pay close attention to that. If you do have those conditions, it's always a good idea to look on the inside of the assembly. Now, of course, the leaching could be caused from a few different other things, but just an insight for you guys to keep an eye on. One other thing that you want to keep in mind when you're looking from a perspective is look at the topography. What is the surface doing? Is the grading shedding away? And then one thing I often see is you have drainage stone next to the foundations. You've got river rock installed, and then also mulch. Well, these materials aren't an adequate drainage material for managing surface runoff. The water will just shred right through, and of course, you're going to saturate the grounds around the foundation. Okay, so if we look at the grounds around the property, if you fill a cup up with water, the foundation can only take so much moisture, especially in the springtime. What happens is, as the ground saturates, the water needs to expand to somewhere, and so thus leading to hydrostatic pressure. Okay, so the water is going to want to push into those cracks, and of course we know we're not insured for that. So make sure that you're paying particular attention to the clearances below the window wells. Okay, I'm sure there's a bunch of investors on here. I see this daily. We've actually experienced this personally, where we didn't maintain the proper clearances below the windows. And as the water melts, the water will push into the window wells and then leach in through the bottom of the sills. I've seen this day in and day out. Be mindful of that. Okay. Now, when you're done looking at all elevations, this is when you want to put your notes onto that checklist that we're going to provide for you. You're going to want to step closer to the house. When you're closer to the property, this is when you look up again, because you're going to want to look for any loose gutter spikes. This is the best time to be looking for the moisture stainings that may be leaking in the gutter systems. Okay, you're looking for loose gutter spikes. Again, you're looking for any loose siding that may be present. And then one thing you have to be mindful about is looking at the caulking details. As investors, we're often buying older properties that don't have modern flashing details like drip edges. Okay, and so you're going to be looking for any caulking that looks to be bubbled, peeling, and then just weathered, cracking. A good tool to use when you're doing your walkthroughs is to have a screwdriver, number 3 square. Of course, you want a flashlight, but just chip away at the wood to see if you got any rot. Okay, if you got wood siding, pay particular attention to any areas of wood near grade or any elevations that have a southwest exposure or west exposure, because those will be more damaged than north or east elevations, of course. Okay, so being mindful to look underneath the windows for any gaps and especially on the threshold between doors. Okay, when I do my walkthrough on my close-up, I will go around the property in one direction and then I will circle back in that opposite direction, because if you go one direction and you're close up, you will definitely miss something. I can tell you this from experience. I've done thousands of inspections and I still have this practice, and I focus on one component at a time. You can't scan the entire wall to try to skim things. You want to pay close attention. Okay, when we are looking at the foundation, you want to be mindful of any cracks in the foundation. Foundation cracks can be easily fixed from the inside. There's a process called polyurethane injection. Any crack in a foundation should be filled because you don't know how much moisture you're going to get during the spring thaw, during the rainy season, and you got to be mindful about those cracks. You don't want water in that basement, especially if it's basement suite and you're not covered, as Derek had shared. So when you're looking at the foundation, look for any delamination, any deflection, and then any stucco that transitions from parging to wood frame construction. make sure that you're attending to that separation that often occurs. So any cracks in the stucco needs to be filled. And then when you're looking at wood trim, you're looking for weatherized wood, okay? If you have wood trim on the exterior and it hasn't been capped because you've got an older property, look for any splitting in the wood. And again, a screwdriver will help you and assist with that identification, okay? Again, write this down as you're doing your assessments because it is very important for you to document all this stuff. A couple of reasons. Number one, you can give your deficiencies list directly to your contractor for repair, and that way there's transparency on what your expectations are. Number two, you're going to have a service history behind you on what you've done, and you've got that maintenance log that if you ever sell, it's very valuable for the next investor or even potential homeowner if you need to dump that asset, okay? Now, continuing with the exterior, one thing I always want to focus on as well is any service entries. So any pipes going in and out of the property, in particular the dryer exhaust, we always look at, we will lift the louvers of the exhaust vent. I want to look to ensure that there's no lint accumulation. It's always a good idea to run the dryer as well to see if everything opens and goes freely. Now, it should be cleaned annually. Home Depot sells this cleaning rod. I think it's like 10 feet long for about 15, 20 bucks. We own one. Every time we do a walkthrough, their quarterly inspection, we just clean it. But the best practice is always 1 year, okay? Now, one thing to be mindful about too is the fresh air intake. The fresh air intake on the home is essentially a hood fan that will be, if it's a new property, it'll be labeled intake. If it's an older property, it'll just be a metal hood with screens below in the hood itself without a louver, okay? Now, these often get sediment and pollen accumulation. If you allow the debris to collect, you're actually affecting the indoor air quality of the home. So a good idea is just to use if your in-laws are visiting, just use their toothbrush to clean it off. Don't use your spouse's, even if you're mad at them. So with that being said, make sure you tend to that by cleaning that. Again, every couple months, you want to look at that. But especially in the spring, as everything starts to flourish, okay? All the seeds start to form and become airborne, okay? Now, when you're still looking on the exterior, you want to identify if you've got any vegetation near the wall, okay? So any trees that may be in direct contact, any vines that are growing. There's this child book that comes to mind that it's called Miss Maple Season. For those of you that have kids, you might be familiar with the book, but there's a quote that goes something along I'd have to quote it, but it's hard for me to retain it. Never forget that the grandest of trees once had grown from the smallest of seeds, something along those lines. Nonetheless, every time I see a tree next to a house within 10 feet, the only thing I can think of is tree roots. Tree roots is a nemesis. Now, the reason for that, if you look at a canopy on a tree, the root system will be twice of what the canopy is. So a lot of people will automatically assume that, oh, I might get tree root infiltration on my sewer line. Yes, that's a great possibility. However, I'm more concerned with the roots pushing against the foundation, and number two, infiltrating the weeping tile, because truth be told, weeping tile always has water in it or moisture, and so the roots will chase that moisture. And we've done scopes on weeping tile, and they are completely clogged with tree roots. So got to be mindful about the trees that are close to the foundation, obviously for damage from prevailing winds and also tree roots infiltrating the line and the weeping tile. So be mindful about how big you allow the trees to grow. Cut them down as they are small. Okay, and when it comes to the exterior doors and windows, for the doors, we did an inspection on a new build this past year. There's 3 doors, 3 of the openings had water damage. Why is that? Because the door was not protected by either an overhang or a storm door. So I'm a huge fan of having a storm door installed. It prevents any driving rains from infiltrating around the weather stripping and even the opening. A lot of times the sweeps aren't properly sealed at the base of the door, and so storm door is worth its weight in gold. Pretty cheap, a couple $100. I'd say $300 or $400 from the big box store and install it. You know, you can sometimes do it yourself depending on your skill level, but definitely recommended. Okay, so when highlighting anything with exterior, prevention is key. Okay, we're gonna go back a little bit onto grading. It's very important and a hot topic. You don't want any pooling next to the foundation. The ideal situation would be that you have 6 feet of grade away and nothing to pool. I know in a practical world it's not always achievable, but that is the best approach. Again, your downspouts, you want them as far away from the property as possible. We've got extensions going out the back alley on some properties because we don't want water coming in. I've got houses with cracks in the foundation. There's no seepage because we're managing the grade and we're also managing the surface runoff from the roof. And so with these little things, you're going to save some money long-term, one with water getting in right away, and also any foundation movement that may occur because of the saturation in the ground, okay? Now, we're gonna kind of dive in on the inside a little bit and talk about the standards that I do when I am evaluating the inside of the house, okay? I always start in the bathrooms. Reason for that, it gives me the opportunity to install or start testing the water right away. So what I do is, as soon as I walk in the bathroom, I crank on the tub, I pull the diverter valve and let the shower head run, and then plug the stopper. Next thing I do is I'll go to the sink, same procedure, crank the water on, shut the stopper off, and then flush the toilet. I'll rotate and do that for a few times, flush the toilet a couple times. Next, what I'll do is I'm going to make sure that the toilet is properly secured to the floor, okay? From there, I'm going to wiggle the tank. I want to make sure that there's no movement in that tank, okay? In the past, what has occurred with one of our properties is the tank wasn't properly secured. One of the tenants leaned back, and then there was a slow leak that developed. So make sure that the bowl is securely fastened to the base of the toilet, okay? So while all the plumbing is running, you want to keep a close eye on it. At this point, the sink is probably at the overflow or near to it. Just keep an eye on that to make sure that it doesn't overflow, of course. This is when you want to look at the caulking inside the bathroom. So any inside transitions, so what I mean by that is an inside corner where the tile meets the acrylic surround, an inside corner of the shower enclosure around the spout, and also in particular, you want to make sure that where the floor meets the apron of the tub, that is properly sealed. Oftentimes, if you've got kids, they're splashing, that water will actually go onto the substrate, which could rot it long-term, of course, over long-term exposure. So once I make note of all the highlights in the report on that checklist, I'm going to go back to the sink. I'm going to drain it. I'm going to drain the tub. I'm hoping that the tub's at least half full. That way it gives enough pressure to expand all the joints, that the drain stopper, and make sure that the metal stopper is sealed properly around the tub base. And then I let the water flow. And then I look underneath the sink to make sure that there's no active leaks. Okay. I'll do a similar situation in the kitchen. I'll run the water, fill both tub or sinks up halfway, pull the cord, let everything drain. And then of course you're going to use a flashlight to identify any moisture. Okay. So with those things in the bathrooms, we could talk about inside components for a very long time, but we're time constrained. And so let's focus on the hot water heater. Now, hot water heaters, they have a design life of 10 to 12 years, as depending on the manufacturer, the warranty and stuff. But the golden rule is if you service it annually, and what I mean by that is if you drain it and clean your burners and also replace the anoid rod every couple of years, it's going to help extend the service life of it. Okay, by doing small maintenance to that tank, you're going to get more life. It's going to last longer. Obviously, it's going to have more money in your pocket at the end of the year. One thing too is what you want to identify is the main shutoff valve. If the main shutoff valve is not properly exercised, what tends to happen over the years is it starts to seize up, and the minute you turn it, it's going to start to leak. And so you want if you're not comfortable testing it, what you can do is have one installed upstream, a new one if you've got an older property, thus eliminate that concern. But again, you want to make these things in the event that something does occur. You don't want to be last minute calling EPCOR on after hours, paying that fee in the event of emergency. You want your tenants to know proactive how to shut the water off in the event of emergency. Okay. Now, as far as going back to the quarterly, Why do I tie my inspections back quarterly? Well, it's because furnace filters need to be replaced quarterly, depending if you've got a 5-inch or a 1-inch face on them. Now, the reason for quarter is because it gives me the opportunity to, obviously, tenant relations. It allows us to review everything inside the house, and we're more familiar with what's going on. So let me give you a scenario, okay? You've got 2 investors. Investor 1 is about to buy a property with Mogul. Number 1, the pro forma looks fantastic. So you've got investor 1 trying to pitch to a joint venture partner. The joint venture is, he's on board. Now, investor number 2 has the same pro forma, attracting a JV, and now he's got a maintenance list and what his service record is for that property, and he submits those to both investors. Who's going to nail it? Of course, the guy that has more maintenance records and a track record. This shows you the due diligence that this guy can do, or this person performs. So again, it's all about looking after that investor's money if you're working with JVs. So very important for you to be mindful, keep those service records, because long-term, you're going to want to know what has been fixed and what you can expect to fix in the near future, okay? Maintenance logs are so important that I can't stress that enough. Now, that's pretty well what I can talk to you guys about maintenance. One other thing that comes to mind is going back to water systems. If your house has a sump pump, make sure that you're proactively testing it, okay? You want to make sure that you're lifting the float and not just bypassing the float switch. And so the float is a little cylinder at the bottom of the basin. We actually have backup pumps at our properties as a preventative measure. If the first one fails and the second one engages, with these proper techniques, it's going to help you save some cash long-term, of course, right? So with that being said, is there any questions? Can you guys hear me? Did I lose everyone here?
Hey Pierre, it's James here. Jen, can you restart my video, please? All right, we've got a few questions rolling in. That was a fantastic presentation, and I mean, the name of the game is proactive.
Mm-hmm.
That is a common theme and of the utmost importance. Now, let's see here. One of the people asked, when you send your checklist through, is it possible to send a couple of example pictures of what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
Perfect. Okay, we'll send that along. Now, what I really want to get to our expert panel here, Pierre. So I really, really appreciate you sharing what you shared. I mean, it's amazing how much money you can save by spending a little bit of time here and a little bit of time there. And the reality of the situation is, folks, when you're a real estate investor, you're more than just an investor. You're a business owner. Mm-hmm. And part of owning a business means keeping an eye on your business from time to time and making sure your business is in good health. And the most important asset in your real estate business is the health of that property. So you either need to roll up your sleeves and get in there and go through that maintenance checklist Pierre advised, or hire somebody that you trust to go through that checklist with you. Not doing it, that's not an option. You got to stay on top of your maintenance. You got to keep an eye on your property, and you got to take care of it.